My uncle left me a shifty little bar in his will. My bouncer and I got beaten up by a little girl.
I started receiving weird VHS tapes in the mail. I never asked for them, but they keep arriving day after day. In every package is a note telling me the exact time to share it with the world, to get it seen by as many people as possible. If I don't, they said, bad things will happen. The following presentation is the contents of one of those tapes. Please help me and watch until the end.
Series My bar is a shabby little thing. Not only does it naturally attract the weirdest patrons, it also never fails to surprise with just how dilapidated it is. One time, I nearly sprained my ankle tripping over a loose floorboard. The backroom people and I try to fix the place all the time, but it's like new issues pop up everywhere. We repair a lamp in one of the bathrooms and next thing you know, another one goes dark. Kinda like that. It wouldn't surprise me if the building was cursed or something. There's upsides to it as well though. Sometimes, we find cool stuff while cleaning. Change for example, or in this particular case a shiny, thin silver necklace with a crystal pendant. Andrick found it while sweeping the floors. May's excited squeals were what alerted me to it. Oh my god, it's so pretty. Weird, since when do our patrons have jewelry on them? Bo chimed in. He rarely says anything, so I remember being surprised at that. Andrick, May began, drawing out the name in a saccharine voice. Can I have it? Sorry, all items found in the bar are at the disposal of our dear lord. I mean lady. He handed me the necklace and I held it up, considering it, well, someone probably lost it. We'll keep it here and see if they come back for it, I decided. And what if they don't? May inquired, a hopeful look in her eyes. If that happens, then I'm gonna start wearing it, I said, smiling as her face fell. I totally would let you have it, but I just don't like people who put up tripwires for me to fall over. May had pulled that actual stunt just a week prior and I'd almost broken my neck. And that's why you don't bite the hand that feeds, Andrick told her in a hushed voice, though I'm sure he fully intended for me to hear. I know it's not good holding grudges, but it was extremely satisfying. The backroom people love playing pranks. I'm used to it and Andrick isn't as much of a son as he makes himself out to be. He once emptied an entire bag of potato chips over my head, but May's ones have always been a little more aggressive. A week went by as we waited for someone to return for the necklace. Then another. I eventually gave in to the desire to declare this sparkly thing my own and simply put it on one day. Suits you, Andrick said curtly, and with that, the matter was off the table. We all just collectively forgot about where it had come from. That was until I came into the bar one morning to find that all the chairs and stools had been stacked up in the middle of the room. One large, sturdy pile of furniture that kind of looked like a jungle gym built by someone who hates kids. I already mentioned my employees like to play pranks on me, but when I had ordered them to return to the back room the night prior, the chairs had all been in place. As far as I knew, none of the four could leave until I'd wake them up again, so this couldn't have been one of their practical jokes. I rounded the enormous stack, examining it only to find nothing hinting at its creator. Andrick, I called out, "Are you guys up yet?" No response. They were still resting, apparently. I stepped up to the door behind the counter, pulled it open and turned on the lights. Spirits of this house, get up already. I watched as the four of them crawled out from the wall, just between us. Sometimes, I make bets with myself about who will be out first. That time, it was Danica. She stretched her arms and waved at me before walking up the stairs, closely followed by the rest of them. "That's new," Danica said when laying eyes on the pile of furniture. "Did you do this?" I asked them. "Why would we do that? You'll just make us put everything back," Andrick replied. I shrugged. He made a good point. It was still fairly unsettling seeing as if it had not been them. Someone else must have gained access to the bar overnight. We tidied up everything and Andrick told me not to worry. "Weird things happen here all the time," he explained. "Always have. It's probably nothing, if you say so." That was only the first of many incidents though. That same night, the bar was pretty full for once and we were watching a game on that small flat screen TV above the counter. I'm not a sports person, but since a lot of the patrons seemed to be paying attention to it, I got sucked in myself a bit. That was until the screen began to flicker and suddenly went out. I could hear disappointed groans coming from several tables and some guy shouted to make it come back on. Andrik shot me a confused look as he reached for the remote. Either of us knew how odd this was. The TV was the one thing about this bar that had never failed us before. I watched as he pressed a few random buttons, then tried to turn it on and off again, but it didn't react. He groaned and swung himself up on the counter with surprising agility, beginning to fumble around with the back of the TV. I don't know what he did exactly, but eventually, it did come back on, transmitting the cheerful sounds of the game. There, Andrik muttered as he climbed back down. I sighed and got ready to clean the counter where he'd stood, when suddenly, the loud noise of static cut through the air. I hurriedly glanced up at the TV again just in time to see a face staring down at me. I couldn't see much of it, just two large grey eyes. The rest was obscured by a thin white bedsheet the person had wrapped around their head and shoulders. Just a second later, the game was back on. I turned around to face the patrons. Did any of you see that just now? Some nodded and waved me off like it was no big deal while others didn't react at all. Andrik looked at me with his brows raised. I just shook my head. I decided I would probably have to stop jumping at every small thing happening here. If I'd end up only being nervous all the time, the people here would lose whatever little respect they hopefully had for me. As the days progressed, however, these things kept happening and they got more and more extreme. I would find the tables turned over when coming in the mornings. One time, 5 of the old bottles we kept behind the counter had been smashed, putting to waste some of our higher quality drinks, and Lord knows we don't have much of those. Our electricity would keep having these little dropouts, and while those never lasted, they would occur often enough to annoy everyone. Worse yet, I kept seeing that face. Every time I turned on the TV or sometimes even my phone, the image of those large eyes framed by the same white blanket would flash up on it for only a split second. Then one night, Bo came up to me while I was standing behind the counter. "Hey, we've got someone sneaking around outside, I think." I looked up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I keep hearing footsteps and the trash can behind the wall has fallen over twice now. I've picked it up both times. I also saw a person creep around there, a really short one dressed in something white. If you want me to go follow them, I could, but I'd have to leave the door unwatched." I felt a shiver run down my spine at his words. "Please check up on it. I'll keep an eye out for the door while you're gone." "Got it." Bo gave me a nod before disappearing outside. I quickly bent down to grab my uncle's box of letters from where I'd stashed it away behind the counter. I had admittedly been a little lazy with my reading. I had only gone through about 2 more at that point, and neither of them contained any advice on what to do when you'd have stuff like this happening. I hurried to grab and scan a few random letters for information, only to find nothing. Upon realizing that if the bar spirits didn't know what was going on, Uncle Mac probably wouldn't have written about it either, I gave up and instead walked up to the door. I stayed there for a while, but I didn't make for a very good bouncer, especially compared to Bo. A look at my watch told me I'd been waiting for 10 minutes already. I was starting to get concerned. Bo literally should have been back by then. Eventually, I cleared my throat and called out his name in a shaky voice. No response, except a strange noise coming from somewhere to the side of the building. There's a very tight little alley between the bar and the house it borders onto its right. It's a dead end and it's where the trash can Bo had mentioned was located. I figured maybe he'd gotten stuck there somehow and needed help. It was hard to imagine anything happening to him considering his enormous stature, but it wasn't impossible. I went behind the counter and grabbed one of our large cutting knives, concealing it inside my handbag before waving Andrik over and letting him in on what was going on. I told him if I wouldn't be back in 20 minutes, he needed to call the police but refrain from going outside himself. Thankfully, there were only 3 people inside the bar at the time, and they were all huddled up in one corner focused on a game of cards. At least they wouldn't notice something was up. I walked outside, the cold air hitting me like a splash of water. This didn't feel right. I tried to keep my steps as quiet as possible. Every time one of my heels met with the cobblestones below, I felt myself wince and the hair on my neck stand up. I had already buried my hand in my purse, clutching the handle of the knife. I rounded the corner and looked down the alleyway. What I saw made me freeze. Bo stood at the very end of it, right in front of the wall. He didn't move or speak, but he had visibly tensed up, staring only at the figure kneeling on the ground a little bit ahead of him. There, next to the overthrown trash can, sat a young girl. She was wrapped from head to toe in a large, white bedsheet, veiling her in a way that left only her head and bare feet sticking out. She was holding the blanket in place with one hand while rummaging through the trash that had spilled out from the small container with the other. My eyes remained glued to her for 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity, before Bo suddenly made a surprise noise. I looked up only to find that he had noticed me. His eyes darted between the child on the ground and myself, and he almost seemed to mouth for me to get lost. The girl raised her head. Turning to Bo, she said in a very quiet voice, "Didn't I tell you to stay still?" He immediately froze up again and she lowered her head, once again focusing on going through the trash. Bo silently raised a finger to his lips. I nodded. She hadn't seen me yet. I didn't know why he was so afraid of her, but I could tell something about her was very wrong. It was not just her blanket, or the fact that she was outside without any shoes this time of the year. It was how she felt. When you have a person standing beside you, you can sometimes feel their warmth and you can see life in their eyes. It's an odd thing to say and I can't properly describe it, but you're simply aware of their presence, one way or another. This little girl did not feel real. It was like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. It was this alien sense of unease that caused my stomach to churn. Bo slowly took a cautious step towards me, placing the soft soles of his shoes as lightly on the ground as he could. It looked almost like he was trying to cross a river by balancing his way over an old, wobbly bridge. When he finally reached me, he grabbed me by the wrist and began tugging me back towards the bar's entrance. That very second, the girl's head jerked around and she stared at us with wide grey eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her high-pitched voice shrill and aggressive. She rose to her feet, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as she slowly took a step towards us. Before I could answer, her eyes narrowed and she let out an ear-piercing screech. She lunged at me, throwing me to the ground with a strength I would have never expected from her. I screamed with pain as she pushed my head against the stone ground, and for a second or two, everything went black. I could hear Bo growling as he tried to pull her off me, only to be shoved away. The girl forcefully turned me over, throwing herself onto my back and starting to scratch the back of my neck. "Get off," I whined. "What are you doing?" Suddenly, I heard a tiny clinking sound and felt something scrape my throat. That's when I remembered the necklace. She had been trying to take it off. Now that she finally had it, she crawled off me. I groaned, slowly turning around to look up at her. She was sitting on the ground beside me, staring at the shiny necklace in her tiny pale hand. She was incredibly calm all of a sudden. "Thank God. I've been looking for it everywhere," she muttered, talking more to herself than me or Bo. "If Mom found out I'd taken it out to play, if she found out I'd lost it, she would have been so angry." She slowly raised her head and looked down at me, something akin to a smile on her face. "Mom loves her jewelry. She hates when I touch it." With that, she got up and, necklace in hand, jogged over to the end of the alley. She was heading right towards the wall, and just as she should have been about to run into it, she disappeared. She didn't fade out or anything, but 1 second she was there and the next she was gone. I stared after her with my neck craned for a good 2 seconds before starting my first fruitless attempt to get up. My whole body was aching and I let out a small whimper. Bo rushed to my side and shoved his arm beneath my shoulders to pull me up, but he was rough and my sides flared up with pain. He apologized and ran back inside the bar, returning with Andrik at his side. I chuckled as I looked up at the two of them, tears of pain in my eyes, yet at the same time weirdly amused by the sheer absurdity of my situation. "What happened?" Andrik asked softly, leaning down to help me get to my feet. "Ask Bo later," I muttered, whining as he propped me up. "Didn't you have a necklace on you?" "Wasn't mine." "Gave it back." The two of them half lead, half carried me inside the new saloon. I contemplated going to the hospital, but then again, nothing was broken and as far as I could tell, it was just bruises. We closed down early for the night and I sat down in one of the cozier corner booths. I didn't get up until morning. I really did end up spending the night in my shabby little bar, my head resting on a table the backroom people had thankfully cleaned for me. It was nice having them all be polite at the same time for once. I didn't sleep the entire night though. I asked Danica to bring me a pen and paper and then told them they could go into the back room and rest if they wanted to. To my surprise, some of them stuck around though. Bo went straight downstairs while May stuck around to watch TV. I had brought a couple books with me and Danica had borrowed one on small businesses which she was reading a lot more diligently than I ever had. Andrik had sat down on the cushioned bench with me and was watching me ponder over my pen and paper. What do you want to write? Since none of you knew about the little girl with the blanket, I've been thinking the letters Uncle Mac left me might need some additions. Andrik laughed. You haven't even finished reading them. True, but I hope whoever gets the bar after me will be more up to the task. And since you're here already, you should help me out. You knew about doppelgangers, so what do you think about this? So now, there is a letter from me somewhere in that box among those that Uncle Mac left me. I won't transcribe it exactly since I just wrote down the better part of everything I know above, but here's what I added with Andrik's help. It's possible she's a poltergeist. However, she apparently isn't bound to any person in particular and has no trouble showing herself in the same form for an extended period of time. Poltergeists are said to be more likely to haunt a person than a location, which we're not sure is the case with her. She seems to have detailed memories of a past life, mentioning her mother as the reason why she was after the necklace. We don't know how exactly that got into the bar by the way, but in the end, we're glad to be rid of it. So if you find any piece of jewelry in the bar that looks like it doesn't belong, just stash it away somewhere the girl can easily find it. Please don't make it hard on her. She seems really confused. It wouldn't be the last time we'd meet her though.